always wondered what it's like for our parents to grow up and what their childhood was like. And since my mom and dad grew up in Germany, we wanted to know what it was like there and how their life was.
Well, we...
Wait a second. Wait till Michael goes high.
We had friends, like children have here too, and we played, and we belonged to sports organizations where we played tennis, soccer, field hockey, and in the winter time we had plenty of snow. We went ice skating, sledding, and we grew up in a very pretty little town, Schwerin.
What was the name of the town?
Schwerin in Mecklenburg. Mecklenburg is the state like here, Massachusetts. It was a pretty town. We have beautiful museums, a terrific theater where there was things going on every night. My parents had subscriptions to operas, plays, concerts, and what have you, ballets. Sometimes they had affairs on Sunday mornings, and when my father as a doctor was called out at night for an emergency, I would run down to the theater, which was only about hardly 5 minutes away, and I would sit in on his seat and watch whatever the performance was. They had that subscription was once a week, and they had for years and years and years the same seats in the orchestra. So then we had this beautiful museum, and it was all in like more or less like in a square, and on the other side of the museum they had the castle, the Schloss, it was called in German, which was also operated like a museum, and they had a beautiful garden path around it, and they had other big parks there, and ice skating, well, like I mentioned before, was in this great big park where they have small ponds, and we had to walk down there, and by the time we got there we were half frozen, and we didn't have skates like you have here, which are mounted on boots. We had to tie them onto the shoes and with a little wrench and so on. That's the way it was. And to come back to what you've asked about playing, we had a great big backyard of tarred, where we did all kinds of games, whatever we wanted to. As a matter of fact, we played field hockey there with the hard ball.
I remember you telling me about that.
With the hard ball, and there were windows from my uncle's paper store, Otto Gutkin's, Mama's father, that is. And many a time that hard ball went up high and right through the window into their office.
Did you have to pay for it?
My father had to pay for it, down right, he had to pay for it.
He didn't make you pay for it?
I don't remember that. Sometimes we had it, well, we sometimes had that taken out of our allowance too. And what else?
Did you play with your brother and sister Eddie and Gerda a lot? Or Gerda was much younger than
Gerda was 6.5 years younger than I am, so no, she played with her cousin Edith, who lived above us, and they always went out and told everybody they were sisters. They were only a few, I don't know, 6 months apart or 8 months apart, and that was a different generation as far as I was concerned.
Would you tell us about, I remember you telling me when I was younger about going with your father sometimes to the farms when he had doctor calls?
Oh yes, that
was fun.
That was fun in that respect, that way back, I remember we used to go on a horse and buggy.
Oh yeah?
And guy who would run that buggy would sit on top, way up high, and with two horses. We had mostly two horses. And my father would sit in back, and we would sit, one of us, we'd take turns, going one and coming back the other one, sitting next to the driver. And when it was a straight road, every so often we could hold the reins. And that was quite a thing, you know. Then we would, when it was winter time, it was so freezing cold. Of course, there was no heat in the horse and buggy, which was open. My father had a fur sack, he used to call it. Great big thing. You sat down and you crawled into it, and you're right up to your waist was in a bag was fur lined. And then he had a big fur coat with a big fur collar, and he would sit in back. And wherever he had to go to the little village, we would, of course, have to stay outside. This wasn't only in the winter time, it was in the summertime too. We had winter only, probably the same from December to, probably March was winter. Snow, not as much snow as you have here at times. And when we got out, for example, when we were with the horse and buggy with my father, and we were out in the summertime, we got out of the buggy, and we snooped around, and they had these little one cow or one horse farmhouses. They had a half a door to the kitchen. The entrance was through the kitchen. A half a door so the dogs and chicken wouldn't run into the kitchen. In the winter time they would close the up half, and of course we would get out and we would look over that door, and the woman of the house would say, "Anything you want?" And we would say, "We're hungry. We have
You
something."
poor little boys.
And then she came out, "Would you like, what would you like? Can we have a piece of bread?" And they had this great big homemade bread, Bauernbrot, we called it. That is like a farmer's bread, homemade, and tremendous size. And she cut off a slice, homemade butter, and cow warm milk.
Was that good?
No, but, well, I don't remember. We didn't know better because they didn't have pasteurization like
Yeah.
they have here now. I'm sure they have it there now too. And when my father was through seeing his patient, he came out and he would say, "What you got there?" We have bread. "Oh, that's delicious. Can I have a taste?" And then, of course, the way things were at that time in Germany, the woman would say, "Doctor, would you like to take a piece of bread home?" And he got a half a loaf of bread to take home.
A lot of times he was paid with food, right?
Well, he wasn't paid. They didn't have to pay anyway because it was all socialized medicine at the time. 98%, I would think, of my father's practice was socialized medicine. And
So the government paid him?
government paid him, yeah. On Sunday mornings, he would sit in his office, and which was, by the way, was in the house. He would sit there and make out these great big sheets and put down, and they went to the government, and then a few weeks later, he got a check.
You know what story I would like to have on tape?
What's that?
The fire engine story.
The fire engine story that you should ask Mama.
Well, he won't be able to tell me anymore. There's a funny
No,
one.
there was a time later on, which we came closer to the Nazi times, when we didn't feel so sure anymore, so secure anymore, I should say, that kids would harass us in the streets all along. And I went out without
You and Eddie?
Yeah, without my parents knowing. I bought a little gun, which I carried with me, which was not a tear gas, and no, there was 5, whatever you call it, little
Pellets?
pellets, not pellets, but real
Bullets?
bullets in there. The first 5 were just alarm, blanks, which made a lot of noise, and the 6th one was a tear gas. And at night when we were supposed to share the room, when we were supposed to go to bed, I used to take that out of my pocket to hide it, and I played, and I took this thing out which holds the bullets and dumped it on the table and kept on clicking, not realizing that the 6th one, which was the tear gas, was stuck in there, and the damn thing went off. And our house would, our room would stink, and what could we do? So I had to go and tell my father, and just this, there is something smelly coming in from the wind, from the yard. I don't know what it is. Of course, my mother, of course, got very alarmed, and they called the fire department. And the fire department, in order to find out, they came with, it was just the time when they had the fire engines motorized. I remember when the fire engines before that were drawn by horses, and they whipped those horses to get going and run and so. So anyway, the fire department came with 3 or 4 engines just to find out what it was. And in order to, I don't know what it was, why.
Was there a lot of alarm in the neighborhood, Dr. Rosenbaum's house or something? I think Werner told me that.
Well, no, the worst part is the engines had stopped right in front of our house. Was a streetcar going up the other way, but the fire engines were parked on the streetcar tracks.
Oh.
And this was just the end of the theater performance, and the people wanted to go home on the streetcars, and the streetcars couldn't go by because the fire engines were there. For some reason or other, I had thrown that bullet out of the window. It was lying in the yard. It was a tiny thing, but still, if the firemen would have seen that, so I edged over there a little few more, and I put my foot on it so they wouldn't see it, to tell what caused that. And then after a while, the firemen, it wore off. And the fireman said, well, there's nothing we can do. We don't find anything wrong. Might as well pack up and go. And afterwards, I don't know how, I found out, first of all, the firemen were all patients of my father. So they wouldn't go and do anything against my father, saying that otherwise it would have been a fine for pulling out the fire engine, a nuisance case, you know. So one of them said later on, I don't know who he said it to, that must have been the oldest son. He must knew all about it. He was so smart and quick with all the answers. Whatever we asked, he always had an answer there. But we couldn't prove anything, so we had to let it go like that. That was the fire engine story.
How many brothers or sisters did your mom or your dad have? Did they live in the area?
My mother, who grew up in Berlin, had 2 brothers. The one you know who came to this country, Uncle Werner in Detroit.
Right, Werner Folk.
Werner Folk. That was my mother's maiden name. And he had a brother which was lost due to the Nazis. My father...
What was his name?
Max. My mother lost her father when she was 9 years old, and all through those years, my grandmother was a widow, just like Mommy's. Same age. Mommy lost her grandfather when her mother was 9 years old. I think it was about 9 years old. But that's not what we're talking about. My father had 1 brother and 4 sisters. The brother was Edith Kushner's father.
What was his name?
Heinrich. He got married rather late, and he was very fond of us. He used to come and buy things and do things, and whatever we wanted was all right with him. we, amongst others, when my parents went to when we got maybe 11, 12, 13 years old, I don't remember, my parents were in the theater, we would go upstairs to him, and he loved to have us, and they would, one day my parents didn't like the theater, and they came home early. Where are the boys? Upstairs. So then my mother would say, I wish you wouldn't let them come upstairs, they're supposed to go to bed. My uncle used to say, this happened several times, my uncle would say, how can I throw my guests out? They come to visit me? That was his answer. He was a very, had a lot of sense of humor, let's put it that way. And he was one thing he did, and I'll never forget, my parents used to buy toys for us, like for Hanukkah and so on, birthdays. We always got the same toys, a little fire engine, or whatever it was. And he used to,
each of you got the
each
same
got
gift?
the same thing. And my uncle used to say to my father, which is right, you cannot buy the same things for them all the time, because in later life they will not be able to have the same things all the time. So you might as well break them off that now. And my father listened to it at the time. We got different things. But what else can I tell you? School?
Yeah. You didn't finish high school? You weren't
Just
able
about.
to?
Yeah,
Or-
just about. But we had a elementary school, 3 years, and then we went to gymnasium, it was called. That was middle school and high school combined. We had, of course, math, Latin, English, Greek, I don't know that, and history, or whatever the other courses were. And then it came due to Hitler, that things were very, we had gym. Due to Hitler, it was just a year, well, I think it was just about a year before Hitler came to power. I had such a miserable time due to the other kids that I quit.
You and Eddie both were harassed a lot on the way back and forth to school. Was
At the end, just before the Nazis came to power.
Did you have very many Jewish friends?
No, there weren't any. There weren't any.
Is that why you weren't brought up very religiously?
I might think so, because I remember way back when I was a little boy, they had a rabbi in that old-fashioned, real old Orthodox synagogue. I might call it Orthodox, but the women in the middle and the women would sit upstairs and so on. But they had to let him go because the community wasn't big enough to pay his salary. And then we had a cantor who came from eastern parts of Europe, who wasn't very perfect in the German language, so it was very difficult. And he conducted services and so on, but he had religious education from this man.
Do you know if your parents were brought up religiously when they grew up as children?
Well, my father was brought up in a fairly religious home, and I think when he was a kid, I think if I remember, my grandmother even had a kosher house. But the other one, my mother's mother, did not. They weren't very religious.
Your father was bar mitzvah though, right?
Yeah.
But you and Eddie weren't.
But go to school, we quit school. I quit school, I don't know, I don't remember what Eddie. I quit school and I come home one day and I said, I can't stand it anymore, I can't go to school anymore. My father was very upset and he said he wanted to send me to medical school in England, and he would manage to pay for it, it wouldn't be a problem. And no, I didn't want to go to school because it wasn't the best education I had gotten under the circumstances, and there would have been too much missing, and I didn't know enough English to do that and so on. So that's when I well, what do you want to do? My father says, as a call up Julius Kahn. It's he was the director of that big tannery, a big operation in all Europe, leather factory. And there was one about 25 miles away from us. And he always had said to my parents, to my father, way back, if any of your, either one of your boys doesn't want to go to college, I'll always have room for him. So my father called him up and he said, yeah, come on over. We'll talk to him. And next week I started in the tannery to work. There was a place of about 1,500 people, a very big operation. And I worked there in the rawhide department. And
Like the cowboys.
the cowboys, yeah, cowboys, all the hides, and they were so dirty and stinking, terrible. But I managed all right. Then, I think it was in '35, they started pogroms in that little town too. To make a long story short, we couldn't work there anymore. We had to quit, and I went to Hamburg, and I worked in the office of a hide company who imported hides from overseas. And that was about the time they wanted to, no, the first company, the leather company, wanted to send me to South America. They had branches, they had a branch, buying offices there. They wanted to send me there. And, well, I couldn't make up my mind, and my parents didn't think it would be the right thing, so that didn't materialize. Then when I was in Hamburg, we saw that you had to do something. You couldn't stay. It was impossible to stay. And you had to have a permit to work, and then my permit ran out. And what was I going to do there? So then I said, there's no other choice. I'll have to go to America. And I said to my father, he should write to his friend, Dr. Rosenheim, who had at that time a sanatorium in Schwerin. He and his wife both were doctors, and his brother was a doctor, and his brother was married to an American woman. And due to the American woman, he could go to America with no problem. Automatically he could get in there. When he was there, he called his brother, meaning my father's friend, and they went over there. And I said to my father, write to him, and by return mail he answered, we'll sign the papers. You had to have a permit to get so you wouldn't be a public burden to this country. Mm-hmm. Somebody had a guarantee for you. So that's how I got to America.
Good. So, that'll be the next chapter. Okay?
Yeah.
Did you get that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I should.
Did you fade out?